A secluded royal bolt hole hidden deep in the Scottish.
She paid a great deal of attention to
A secluded royal bolt hole hidden deep in the Scottish Highlands.
It's very often wreathed in mist and rain.
More than 30 rooms over 3 floors with an imposing tower right in the middle.
There was something magical about it, about the light and the position overlooking this wild ocean.
Adored by King Charles.
He loves being there.
It's just a perfect spot. It's just completely secluded.
And beloved by the late Queen Mother.
She just thought, I've got to have this. She fell in love with it there and then.
This is the Castle of May. Purchased for just £100 after the death of her husband, it's here that the Queen Mother chose to heal from her grief.
She pulled up beside it and she looked at it and said, how sad it looks, just like me.
Transforming it from a derelict ruin.
It's completely uninhabitable.
There are no bathrooms there, there's no plumbing, no electrics. I mean, it must have been total chaos.
Into a sumptuous royal residence.
Allegedly, Ralph Lauren, when he saw some photographs of the Queen Mother's home, decided to start using tartan in his collections.
This dramatic Elizabethan castle has hosted some of the royals' most raucous parties.
What she wanted was a party house, a party castle.
The Queen Mother didn't go to bed. Everybody got absolutely bamboozled. And then they got to get up again the next day and did it all again.
Outside, it has an awe-inspiring garden.
In those gardens, there are most extraordinary vegetables and fruits that you would not expect.
That holds cherished memories for our king.
Even now, he still puts sweet peas on a lovely bench that reminds him of her.
Now we reveal what this intimidating castle is really like to live in.
Princess Margaret never actually spent a night at the castle because she did not like it.
And the many secrets it still has locked inside.
That remoteness, I think, enabled her to truly be herself.
The place rocked with laughter.
In the summer of 2024, King Charles made his way to the very tip of the British mainland. This was his annual August pilgrimage to the Castle of May, the remote Scottish home of his late grandmother. And this year, his journey had special resonance.
King Charles III has certainly had a rocky start to his reign, actually, and particularly this year.
Not only his own cancer diagnosis, which, given his age, is obviously quite worrying, but also his daughter-in-law.
So I'm sure he was really looking forward to take some time out where he can have some downtime. I think with the Castle of May, he gets to retreat and he gets to unwind.
Nearly 700 miles from the hustle and bustle of Buckingham Palace, the Castle of May sits right on the edge of the coast, overlooking the Orkney Islands in the distance.
So the Castle of May is the most northerly inhabited castle, I think, in the whole of the UK. It's right at the tip of Scotland in Caithness.
It's very often wreathed in mist and rain, and it never stops blowing.
When you're driving towards the Castle of May, all you see is the tower, and then as you get closer and closer, the trees start revealing this wonderful fairy tale building.
This is a 16th century castle in miniature, set in 30 acres of grounds with over 30 rooms spread over 3 main floors.
When you go through the front door, there's a sort of double staircase. And then you get into all the main rooms, the reception rooms, the dining room, sitting room, and then all the bedrooms are upstairs.
But it's the decor of this Scottish castle that's the most surprising. It's trapped in a time warp, from when it first became the Queen Mother's home back in the 1950s.
If you step inside the Castle of May today, it still looks very much as the Queen Mother decorated it.
It's all a bit chintzy, but I think it very much evokes that 1930s, 40s, 50s world in which really the late Queen Mother lived to the end of her life.
Most of the rooms are bright and quite frilly, and a lot of, sort of floral and tartans around.
Every surface was covered with family photos or shells, things that she'd picked up from the beach, vases, flowers. Is a real reflection of her personality.
And that's the reason why King Charles makes this journey at the same time every year, around her birthday at the beginning of August. It's the place that reminds him most of his cherished Gangan, the Queen Mother.
I think, a lovely touch is the fact that her Macintosh and her wellies are still by the door. So, it just feels like she's just popped out.
The Queen Mother's connection to this wild spot began over 70 years ago. She first set eyes on the castle in June 1952, less than 6 months after the death of her beloved husband, King George VI.
She was absolutely devastated by the death of her husband.
She just really didn't quite know what to do with herself. She was consumed with grief because her whole life changed.
All the trappings of being the consort to the monarch had suddenly disappeared.
Her daughter was the Queen. Her daughter was going to be living in Buckingham Palace.
It was the loss of her job, her status, her home, her future. Suddenly all that was taken away and she was now Queen Mother without a defined role.
The Queen Mother's friend Doris Viner was worried, so she invited Elizabeth to visit her in the Highlands.
They were just driving sort of through Caithness and through that part of Scotland, and she saw the Castle of May. It wasn't called the Castle of May then, it was called Bargill Castle. She pulled up beside it and she looked at it and said, "How sad it looks, just like me." And that was it, she was absolutely sold.
And she just thought, I've got to have this. She fell in love with it there and then.
And then she went about buying it. Everyone thought she was completely mad. But she had this feeling that she wanted to restore it, like she was restoring herself.
From the 1920s, the Castle of May had been the property of Captain Imbert Terry, but for him, it had become nothing but trouble.
I mean, so often with these cases, you have a castle that's built at enormous expense. It needs upkeep, and the enemy, turns out, it's not an invader from without. The enemy is a lack of money from within, and that is the downfall of a castle. Captain Imbert Terry and his wife had apparently retreated into the rooms that happened not to have a leaking roof.
He actually offered the Queen Mother the property for free, but she couldn't quite accept that as a gift. So they came to the decision that she would pay for the value of the lead on the roof.
For that, she paid the not-so-royal sum of £100, over £2,000 in today's money, and suddenly became a homeowner for the very first time. But the reality of the task she was taking on was about to take hold.
The condition of the castle when the Queen Mother bought it was terrible. I mean, it was completely uninhabitable. I think the tower was the only part of the castle that wasn't leaking water.
The roof had been stripped off by a storm. There were no bathrooms there. There's no plumbing, no electrics. I mean, it must have been total chaos.
I mean, you do have to kind of think, what was the Queen Mother thinking when she wanted to buy this wreck?
She wrote to her treasurer and said, do you think I'm mad taking on this project?
The Queen Mother was ready to face the challenge head on, but was this 16th century castle ready for her?
The interiors are like nothing it can ever have seen before.
For generations, the royal family have had a strong connection with and a deep love of Scotland. The Queen Mother spent many of her childhood summers just outside Dundee. Charles and his brothers went to Gordonston Public School near Inverness, and William and Kate famously met at university in St Andrews. So perhaps it's unsurprising that their royal residences pepper the Scottish landscape. When the Queen Mother bought the Castle of May in 1952, it became the royal family's 6th Scottish home.
I think Scotland just runs through the veins of the royals. They all have their favourite little parts of Scotland.
For Queen Elizabeth, it was Balmoral. As Princess Eugenie said, it's Granny's favourite place on earth.
The King, he favours Birk Hall.
But for the Queen Mother, it's the Castle of May.
When she first saw the little castle on the coast of Scotland, it may have tugged at her heartstrings. But the reality of taking it on would turn out to be far harder than she ever realised.
She felt an emotional, personal attachment to this place, and she wanted to get in and save it before it was destroyed.
It was very unusual for a senior royal such as the Queen Mother to buy a property. Normally, you know, they're inherited, or you move into a place because someone has died. It was this feisty lady saying, right, I'm going to strike out on my own here.
Rebuilding and refurbishing a crumbling castle on this lonely coastline was going to be a challenge. But the Queen Mother wasn't the first person to be captivated by this remote spot. That had been George Sinclair, the 4th Earl of Caithness, who built the fortress back in the 16th century.
In 1566, George Sinclair, who's part of a long-established clan, creates a new house on the North Scottish coast so that the dynasty is assured. It's built on a Z-shaped plan. It's a masculine-looking building.
The Sinclairs' idea of a comfortable family home was certainly a long way from the Queen Mother's.
So when you arrived in the 16th century, you would see not a grand entrance, but in fact a fairly small door into a spiral staircase at the junction of a couple of wings. It's not welcoming you. It's a house where you ensure that you're safe and defendable, and that keeps others out and keeps you in.
His 3rd son, also called George, renamed the castle Barrigal, and for the next 300 years, it passed down the Sinclair family line, father to son. But whilst the castle housed generation after generation of Scottish aristocracy, it didn't host a British royal until the Victorian era, when its then owner, the Lord of Caithness, James Sinclair, welcomed the heir to the throne, Queen Victoria's eldest son, Prince Edward.
James Sinclair was a lord-in-waiting to Queen Victoria, and he was also a tutor to Edward VII.
The Prince of Wales didn't have universally fond memories of all of his tutors, but Lord Caithness was one of the ones Edward had liked, and so he wanted to come and visit him.
In 1876, the perfect opportunity arose when Prince Edward and his wife Alexandra were invited to open a new bridge over the River Wick. James Sinclair was delighted to host the royal couple at the castle.
The Victorian period is where we can thank the tradition of having royals plant trees whenever they're anywhere for a prolonged length of time. And at the Castle of May, the Earl of Caithness asks Prince Edward and Princess Alexandra to plant a tree.
Prince Edward, he planted a horse chestnut, and the princess, she planted an ash.
Nearly 150 years later, both trees are still standing.
The Queen Mother continued the tradition. When she moved in, she planted her own trees, and King Charles and Camilla have continued it as well.
So it just sort of extends that story, which I think is a lovely touch.
When James died, the castle passed to his son George, who would be the last Sinclair to live there. Then in the following years, Barrigal passed through the hands of various local landowners and even the army. It slowly began to fall into disrepair, until 1952, when it was spotted by the Queen Mum.
As Queen Elizabeth, she owned, in inverted commas, a huge number of properties, Buckingham Palace, Windsor, Sandringham, but they were never personally owned by her. And when she was widowed, suddenly all of those properties belonged to the next monarch, which was her daughter, Elizabeth II. So when she bought the Castle of May, it was the first time she had her own home.
Her Royal Highness's first order of business was to change her new castle's name. After nearly 200 years, it became the Castle of May once again. Then she came face to face with her purchase.
It really was in a right old state. It was barren, really, and a ruin, and probably was going to be demolished.
The roofs had to be redone. The tower had to be made structurally sound.
She had to start really from basics, bringing in all the utilities. I mean, we are talking water and electricity and heating, because none of that existed.
But the Queen Mother remained undaunted. She had a vision for her castle and was determined to bring it to life.
She paid a great deal of attention to the renovations.
She decided from the start, really, to source everything as locally as possible and use local tradesmen, actually, which I think rather annoyed some of the other landowners.
Her neighbour, Lord Thurso, and her shared a builder. And strangely enough, whenever she appeared, Thurso lost his builder. So obviously the Queen Mother took a more important role than Thurso did.
It took nearly 2 years for the building work to finally be completed, and painting and plastering could begin in spring 1954. Now fully in her element, the Queen Mother leant into putting her personal mark on every room of her new home.
The interiors are like nothing it can ever have seen before. The fabrics are dripping with flowers. Mahogany furniture from the 18th and 19th century from England and France. I mean, this is her. These are her tastes.
I would suppose, people might describe it as very feminine, but, the touches are there because you've got to try and soften what is a castle at the end of the day and make it into a home. And that's exactly what she did. She wanted to feel comfortable in there. So she, lined nice large sofas to relax in, rugs on the floor.
I think it's fair to say that the Queen Mother's taste was eclectic. So she bought things in local antique shops. She filled the castle with prints and pictures of the local area by local artists.
There are knickknacks from her many, many trips abroad, and even joke presents, such as a Loch Ness Monster toy sat atop the curtain pelmet. In the library, instead of going for a real stag's head, there's a cuddly toy version. And I think that really just speaks to the humour and softness of the Queen Mother.
Each room has been decorated differently, in different colours.
A lot of tartan, a lot of chintz.
But whilst to the modern eye the Queen Mother's style was very grandmotherly, to say it politely, it didn't go unnoticed by the glitterati of her time.
Allegedly, Ralph Lauren, when he saw some photographs of the Queen Mother's home, was so inspired by this that he decided to start using tartan in his collections. So the Castle of May is probably one of the most fashionable royal homes in terms of its impact.
Perhaps this shouldn't be so surprising. The castle had to suit the lifestyle of a woman raised from birth in the lap of luxury. The Queen Mother was used to being surrounded by staff who do even the simplest task on her behalf, and her home needed to reflect this. She dined in style.
Dining was very important to the late Queen Mother, so the dining room is quite formally laid out with lovely wooden chairs. So that's probably the grandest room.
At the east end of the dining room is a huge tapestry with the Queen Mother's coat of arms on it. You can't forget who the owner of that house is while you're there.
She also had a butler's pantry, if you like, but she wanted her guests not to have to hang around for particularly their drinks.
They also had sort of a lift installed for food to go up and down from the kitchens, and it was hand cranked, but it was so noisy that the butlers couldn't use it. They didn't want it screeching throughout dinner, so the butlers had to run up and down a really narrow staircase with all the dishes for dinner.
Across the castle, the Queen Mother created the feeling of a much-loved and well-lived-in family home. It was completely different to the approach she was taking simultaneously in Clarence House.
You can see the two halves of the Queen Mother's life in the 1950s and the 1960s by the respective ways she decorates Clarence House, her home in London, versus the Castle of May, her home in Caithness. Clarence House is very much decorated as a traditional royal residence. It's a bit grander. It's where she'll be receiving foreign visitors for state visits.
The Castle of May, on the other hand, because it was so far from London, that remoteness, I think, enabled her to truly be herself there.
After 3 long years of renovations and at a rumoured cost of £60,000, over £1 million today, the castle was finally ready to move into. The Queen Mother was delighted, but what would her family think of her eccentric project?
Princess Margaret never actually spent a night at the castle because she did not like it.
But how about the Queen and Prince Philip? Would the Castle of May be more to their liking? The Castle of May dominated the Queen Mother's world for the first half of the 1950s, offering a welcome distraction from everyday life.
This house, the first and only house that she ever owned, took her out of that slough of despond that she was in the months after her husband's death.
And I think it really was that the purchase of the Castle of May and then the subsequent renovations that gave her a real kind of project upon which to focus.
She had the restorative thing of something that was crumbling to love, and that's what kept her going.
In 1955, the Castle of May was finally ready for the Queen Mother to spend her first night. But first, she had to get there.
The Queen Mother travelled like it was 1910. She had been raised an Edwardian lady, she still travelled like an Edwardian lady, and that meant enough luggage to, if not sink an ocean liner, certainly to make it wobble at the keel.
So there would be huge amount of movement of suitcases and provisions and clothes. Probably she never even wore half of them.
But despite the mountains of luggage, the Queen Mother's visit soon fell into a reassuring pattern.
The Queen Mother would go to the castle twice a year. She would go in August for almost 2 or 3 weeks. She'd set up residence there, and then she'd go again in October for 10 days.
She wasn't an early riser, really, so I think she probably often would have breakfast in bed and then come down, undoubtedly go for a brisk walk, and then she'd like to have a nap at 12 o'clock.
She was often disturbed by local planes from the RAF that would fly over that area. So she actually wrote to the RAF and asked them to kindly stop flying the planes over. So there was essentially a no-fly zone imposed over the Castle of May so the Queen Mother could get her rest in the afternoon.
Every luncheon, despite the weather, was always outside, which is very daunting. It won't be like a picnic on a rug. It's not like that, it's a proper seated luncheon. So they would sort of erect a windbreak, very often out of hay bales, so that they could eat just sort of right by the windbreak. But often, I mean, everything blew away. But that was part of the fun.
After that, she'd go around her gardens usually a couple of times a day, then possibly visiting her livestock.
Afternoon tea was very, very important. 5 o'clock, always. She had a favourite teapot, which was very unground. One of those big, sort of pre-war brown teapots. And she used to love using that because people expected all this amazing silver, which of course they had, but she loved pouring tea out of her brown teapot.
And everywhere the Queen Mother went, she was surrounded by corgis. And that included the Castle of May.
The corgis were more royal than the Queen Mother. They were fed with the very best cuts of chicken or meat from the kitchens.
When everybody sat down for tea at 5 o'clock, this was the time for the dogs to be fed. So the footman would bring the Queen Mother a silver tray with the dog bowls or with their supper on it as well, so that they could eat at the same time.
But the most fun was always to come in the evenings.
What she wanted was a party house, a party castle. And that's what she got.
I mean, if you were anyone in British society in the 50s and the 60s, you wanted an invitation to one of the Queen Mother's away weekends at the Castle of May. Her parties were so legendary that the local landowners wouldn't go on holiday during that time in August and that time in October when they knew that she was coming to stay in residence, just in case they got an invitation.
Everyone that was invited there was always interesting, but most of all, they were always fun.
She had some of the leading lights of, you know, cinema, art, TV, artists, literary agents, horse racing, obviously, jockeys, owners.
And the Queen Mother did everything she could to make sure her guests felt comfortable.
There's a story told that at one of the dinner parties at the Castle of May, a guest reached down and lifted up his soup bowl and drank from it. And the Queen Mother could see that another guest was about to remonstrate, so she immediately picked up her bowl and drank from it herself and said, "I think soup tastes much better this way."
And after dinner, the party really got going.
The place rocked with laughter. There was a lot of Scottish songs. The Queen Mother had a very beautiful voice.
There'd be a sing-song round the piano or dancing, which was what she really loved.
There'd be a conga line, you know, round the house.
If the Aurora Borealis or the Northern Lights appeared at any point in the supper, the Queen Mother would lead all the guests out so that they could stand and look at them.
And they played all those kind of crazy games that people still play, maybe at Christmas. Charades, certainly games that involve, you know, a group of people that probably had a lot to drink. I mean, the Queen Mother always had her own bottle of champagne in front of her.
They were, by all accounts, raucous affairs. The Queen Mother didn't go to bed, the booze was free-flowing, everybody got absolutely bamboozled, and then they got to get up again the next day and do it all again.
The Queen Mother's guests loved a visit to the castle, but sadly, the same couldn't be said for her own flesh and blood.
Princess Margaret was not keen on the Castle of May at all. She called it Mummy's drafty castle.
You know, the wind was howling all the time, it rained most of the time. I think Margaret didn't really appreciate the fact that when it didn't rain, it was completely, stunningly beautiful.
The Queen Mother did give Margaret a bedroom to stay in. It had a four-poster bed, and as with many of the rooms, it was full of frills and florals. But Margaret never actually stayed the night. She didn't like the property enough, or the journey.
One of the highlights of the royal year was the Queen's annual cruise around the Western Isles, where she would always pop in and visit Mummy.
Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip would take the royal yacht Britannia, and they would take that up to the Castle of May.
And they would come ashore at Scrabster Harbour, where they would be met by Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and a convoy of cars would then go to the Castle of May, where the most lavish lunch of the year would be laid on.
And they'd have this wonderful lunch, and everyone would go and look at the gardens and look round the castle. Then they would toddle back to the harbour and get on board Britannia. Everyone would run up the stairs and get sheets, and they would wave the sheets from the windows, and Britannia would let off fireworks. So it was part of this ritual, and it just must have been such fun.
But although the Queen's Britannia visits to the Castle of May were a cherished part of the royal calendar, just like Princess Margaret, it seems that the Queen and her family never stayed within the castle's walls either. It's been reported that the Queen Mother's little castle didn't offer the luxury that other members of the royal family were used to.
Certainly as time wore on in the 70s and the 80s, and the Queen Mother kind of got into her dotage, she didn't spend any money on the upkeep of the house. In fact, anecdotally, Elizabeth and Margaret would pay for sofas or for chairs to be reupholstered in exactly the same fabrics that Mummy wouldn't notice.
And even when they weren't sneaking around behind her back, it's been suggested that the Queen and Princess Margaret still had to be careful with any new purchases.
The Queen said the only way they got a new carpet into the Castle of May was to gift the Queen Mother an exact replica of the old one.
I think she genuinely kept thinking she was going to die, so there was no point her spending money on the upkeep of a house that she wasn't going to enjoy. But of course, she lived a lot longer than I think probably everybody, including her, thought she would.
And it wasn't just members of her family that took exception to the castle's quirks and eccentricities. Even the Queen Mother's most devoted staff sometimes struggled with life there.
Different staff had different reactions to the Castle of May. Some of them loved it. They loved the wildness of the weather, how it could shift from sunshine one minute to storms the next. Other staff had a slightly different take on it. We know that William Tallon, one of the Queen Mother's most prominent servants, nicknamed Backstairs Billy, detested it.
The London staff did not like going there because there was nothing to do apart from get blown about by the wind and walk on the beach and obviously look after the Queen Mother.
But the castle may have one visitor that feels perfectly at home.
There have been a few people that have experienced footsteps and strange noises and lights dimming for no reason.
Those spiritual happenings have been blamed on a young lady with a tragic tale.
So, like all good ghosts, the Green Lady at the Castle of May has been seen many times by guests.
The ghost is this girl called Fanny, who's the 14th Earl of Sinclair's daughter. Now, when she was 18 years old, she fell in love with this boy. Her father didn't like it, and he banished the boy. Fanny was absolutely devastated and threw herself from one of the upper windows to the ground below and died. Now, today, that upper window is completely blocked out with concrete, but her ghost roams the halls of the Castle of May.
To this day, staff are said to avoid going to the upper floors if they can help it, keen not to bump into her in the long corridors. The one place in the castle everyone was happy to go to was the Queen Mother's gardens. The walled garden had begun life in the 17th century and at one point must have been grand. But when she purchased the house, it had been heavily neglected.
By the time she bought it in 1952, it was still in a bad state. It was quite overgrown.
The Queen Mother was a very keen gardener. She had already done wonders to the garden at Clarence House and also then subsequently Royal Lodge at Windsor. So I think it's unsurprising that she turned her attentions to the garden at the Castle of May. What is surprising is that you would have thought that it was a pretty hostile environment.
The castle's exposed position in the wilds of the Scottish Highlands posed a unique problem.
Although the weather can be mild because of the Gulf Stream, I think being that far north and on the coast, I think it can also be very, very fierce. Tumultuous seas and winds that could lift a cabbage up and take it 60 feet. There's something called the Great Wall of May, which is 15 feet high of sandstone, and that really protects the garden from the weather.
You know, outside of those walls, the wind would be blowing, possibly salt spray coming over the wall as well. But inside, it's just tranquil, it's slow, it's beautiful because you get all the scent as well coming from all of the roses.
In those gardens, there are the most extraordinary vegetables and fruits that you would not expect. I mean, not just apples, for example, but peaches grew there, and really quite exotic vegetables. And that was all because they'd made this protected environment.
Her gardens were designed to be at their peak whenever the Queen Mother was visiting, and she loved them.
So the Shell Garden was one of her favourite spots. This is where she really wanted to grow her Albertine roses and her London Pride roses. All the pathways are made from crushed shells, which are taken from the coastline. And she would just sit there in summer afternoons and just really enjoy it. It was a labour of love.
It was a wonderful homely cottage garden at its best in August, full of very traditional plants, rose borders, nasturtiums, dahlias, alliums.
She wanted to grow plants that she was familiar with and also what she'd grown up with.
But this didn't stop her gardeners also producing their own unique varieties.
So there have been two main plants that have been named after the Castle of May. One is an agapanthus, or lily of the Nile, with a lovely violet flower, and then the beautiful sweet pea, which is pure white, just really reminds me of the late Queen Mother, absolutely stunning, with a delicious scent.
For nearly half a century, the Queen Mother's yearly visits continued. But in 2001, the Castle of May welcomed her one last time. Just a few months later, on the 30th of March 2002, she died at her home in Windsor.
When she died, there was a real kind of outpouring of emotion, and I think there's also a recognition that Queen Elizabeth was bereft at the loss of her mother. And there was profound sadness at her passing.
And people were really, really heartbroken. The country was shocked and devastated by the death of the Queen Mother.
A nation was in mourning. But on the most northerly tip of Scotland, alongside the grief, another question was on everyone's lips. What would happen to the Castle of May now?
I suppose anything could have happened after the Queen Mother's death. I mean, I don't know who would have wanted to live there.
Would it be allowed to fall back into obscurity again? Would it be allowed to become dilapidated?
What very few knew was that the Queen Mum had written a secret plan to control what would happen to her castle next. In spring 2002, the Queen Mother died and the nation came together to mourn a life fully lived.
The death of the Queen Mother was obviously a major national event. She was extremely old, she was nearly 102, and everyone knew that she'd become more and more frail.
She was known for her sense of humour, she was known for her smile, she was known to be quite humble. And I think on her death, it really shook the nation.
What surprised everyone was the extent of the public mourning.
Hundreds of thousands of people queued in London to see the Queen Mother's coffin.
This was a woman who was very, very important to 20th century Britain. She was a member of the royal family for 78 years, the last Empress of India for good or ill. I think she was important to us in the United Kingdom.
On the northern tip of Scotland, the Castle of May stood empty for the first time in nearly 50 years, unsure what the future would hold. But there needn't have been a worry. The Queen Mother had a plan to protect her beloved castle all along.
The Queen Mother was very canny. I mean, she knew that at some point she was going to die. So this trust had been set up to run the Castle of May in perpetuity.
She'd made sure a member of the Sinclair family was part of the Board of Trustees, so that even the original owners were still part of that story. She had also set in motion a process by which it would pass to her grandson, future King Charles III.
Prince Charles effectively took over as the main trustee.
So that there was a perfect balance between it staying within the family, but also that it would start to transition into being a public property, into a place that people could visit.
But what would paying members of the public make of the Queen Mum's eccentric retreat? They were about to find out. Less than 5 months after her death, on the 14th of August 2002, the castle opened to the public.
1,200 people went on the first day, which is astonishing, because it's quite a small castle.
Then on day 2, I think it was like 900 people. And it's gone from strength to strength, really.
Nearly 30,000 people visited in the first year alone. But even though the crowds now flock to enjoy Charles's beloved Gangan's work, it hasn't stopped him visiting her favourite place too.
Castle of May is a really special place for King Charles. He absolutely adored his grandmother.
They were more than just grandma and grandson. They were soulmates. I think he physically and emotionally feels close to her when he's there.
Prince Charles would eulogise about her indomitable spirit, and she passed that on to her daughter, Queen Elizabeth II. So the castle is a sort of personal homage to his beloved grandmother. It's a way and it's a time that he can think of her, he can look at her portraits, some of her books are still in the library.
And even now, you know, he still puts sweet peas on a lovely bench that reminds him of her.
A man after his grandmother's heart, Charles enjoys his time at the castle just as much as she did.
He loves being there. He goes fishing every day, and he doesn't have any lunch. He'll sit down and he'll work, and then he'll stop and have a great big royal tea.
It's very much a place where he can enjoy his love of nature.
He will still talk to the head gardeners, he will still decide on the plants, he will still decide on how things should be grown. Very much obviously about organic gardening and sustainability, which is very, very paramount in his thoughts.
The estate is run in a sustainable way with the Aberdeen Angus cattle, with the sheep, produce from the kitchen garden. So I think the Queen Mother will be delighted that the Castle of May is in such good hands.
Even new members of the royal family have found unlikely connections to the Queen Mother on their trips to the castle.
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex visited the castle in 2018, and over that visit, that's when King Charles, who was Prince Charles then, and Meghan Markle figured out that Meghan has the same birthday as the Queen Mother. And Prince Harry talks about this in his book Spare, and he says that, you know, his father and Meghan were already close, but that seemed to sort of really gel their relationship more and encouraged his dad to tell him all these stories about the Queen Mother that he'd never heard before. And that must have been really lovely, actually, for all of them.
Royal visits aside, the castle is now a savvy business. Admission fees regularly top $250,000 a year, and the Trust are constantly adding new attractions to keep it fresh.
The King's reforms to the Castle of May have really turned it into a much more self-generating estate. You can hire the dining room for dinners, there's a B&B opened in the grounds, there are cottages that have been built for rental. That's a very important ingredient to any estate that hopes to be successful going into the 21st century.
The wonderful thing now is that the house has come alive and has been preserved and is probably doing better both financially and in terms of its upkeep than in her many years of residence.
I think people really love being able to get a peek into royal life, to be able to look through the window and see what these houses, these castles are really like. And I think that's why the Castle of May is so popular.
But crucially, the castle has found a way to keep the memory of its most beloved inhabitant alive for generations to come.
Somehow, the spirit of the Queen Mother is still at the Castle of May, even though she's been dead nearly a quarter of a century.
It's a place where people can remember her and also enjoy what the Queen Mother wanted, the beauty of Scotland.
It will always be the Queen Mother's castle.